This is Gemara Zevachim Daf Test, the Daf for Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei. But once again, we like to extend the dedication of today's Daf as a Schos Aliyas Teshama of Aster Reyzel Baser מאיר as you begin a new year of Daf. Baruch Hashem, what a Schos to be able to learn together. All the learning should be as Schos Aliyas Teshama of Aster Reyzel Baser מאיר, as well as a Schos Refuah Shlema for Gabriel Simcha Ben Miriam Ahuva. As we enter a new year, a year of only brachos, Yeshuas, and Emir Hashem, a refuah shalema as well. So we're holding on, really, we got to Tesam and Aleph, but to go back for a moment to Chesem and Beis, really towards the top, in which the Gemara comes along to discuss the last part of the Mishnah. The Gemara began about 6 lines down. The Gemara said, Minahani Mili, 10 lines down, the last din of the Mishnah, which is what, or the Brisa, that a Karban Pesach during the rest of the year, if it is shechted for a different reason, it's going to be kosher. As we just look back all the way up, 6 lines to the top at the Brisa, Tanu Rabbanan, it taught the Brisa, Pesach bizmanei l'shmai kosher shaloi l'shmai pasol, u'b'shar yimai sashana l'shmai pasol shaloi l'shmai kosher. So that din of a Pesach, a Shar Yemais Hashana, that Shaloi Lishma, that it's for a different karban, is going to be kosher. And we're in the middle of discussing what is the Mekar for this halacha. So now we're really at the very bottom towards the top as we turned over the Amin at the end of this year. But says the Gemara, let's go towards the bottom, as the Gemara explains that really we have a klal upradu klal. Iyatadon alkena prat ma'abram v'rshu shalei l'shmai v'kosher. Av kol shu shalei l'shma is going to be kosher. So let's pick it up from there. Says the Gemara, and that's going to be the makar that a shlamim shar yimais hashana shalei l'shma is going to be kosher. Says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom. But wait. That which the pasuk was referring to, that which the klal prat klal was referring to, which was the prat. What was the prat in the pasuk? It was the shlamim. Says the Gemara, if that is mefurash, it's something that comes via a neder or a nedava. I've called abba ben ever nedava, and therefore, what's the kasha? So this should limit our din. We're discussing a karban pesach shar yimais hashana shalei lishma. So if it's a shlamim, fine. If it's an ayla, fine. Why? Because that is bin eder medava. Says the Gemara, klaba bin eder medava ayla shlamim in chatos v'asham lai. And that's not what the Brisa said. The Brisa said that a pesach Shar Yimais Hashana Shaloi Lishma is going to be kosher. So this can't be the makar. Rather, says the Gemara, Ella Lizevach. Says the Gemara, okay, new makar, 2 lines from the bottom. Lizevach is Rebuyehu, comes to be marbad, that all karbanos that this Pesach was shechted Shalishma will be kosher. Asks the Gemara in the last line, how do you know? Maybe whatever it is shechted, it has to be like it. Maybe this karban pesach should assume the position, should assume the type of karban for whatever it was shechted for. So Amar Rav Avin teaches Rav Avin as we turn over to today's Daf Tes on the top line of Tesam and Aleph. Says Rav Avin, Doichin kachim hanecholim eitzel kachim hanechol. Says Rav Avin, you want to be memayet, you want a limud? I'll tell you what the limud could be. The limud is that you could be doichin kachim which are eaten for other kachim which are eaten. However, as the Tab Rashi points out, that this Pesach originally was for a carbon that was eaten, therefore it could be pushed for other carbonates which are eaten like a shlamim. However, ve'in doichin kachim nechalim, this Pesach it's a kachim she'einon nechalim, and therefore says the Gemara, you want to say this Pesach shlamim? I understand. However, it certainly cannot be an ayla. But ask the Gemara, to chatas v'asham miloi misachli, I don't understand. Chatas and asham are indeed eaten as well. And therefore the question is, why would the Karban Pesach not be able to become a chatas and asham? Ella says, Adam. Says the Gemara, no, we got to be more specific. The Karban Pesach, something which is eaten by Kol Adam, is Doiche Itzal Kachim and Acholim, the Kol Adam. And Vin Dechem Kachim and Acholim, the Kol Adam, Itzal Kachim She'ein Acholim, the Kol Adam, cannot be pushed to a carbon that's not eaten, by everyone. And therefore, the Pesach is not eaten, eaten by everyone, Chatas and Asham are only eaten by what? Zichrei Kahuna, as the Rashi on the third line points out, that what does it mean in Chol Adam? It means limited to the male Kohanim, and therefore, that's why the Pesach cannot become the Chatas or the Asham. Rav Yosi, Rav Avin, another Teretz Amar, Deichin Kachim Kalim. Eitzel Kachim Kalim. However, Vein Deichem Kachim Kalim, Eitzel Kachim. Since the Karban Pesach is Kachim Kalim, therefore it can become a Shlamim, which is Kachim Kalim. But it cannot become an Oila, Chatas, or an Asham, which are Kachim. Ask the Gemara Batzler Rav Yitzchak B'Rebbe Savrov. Rav Yitzchak B'Rev Savrov asks, Eimam. Shachted l'shem meiser le'avim meiser. Why don't we say if it was shachted for the sake of meiser, then the Pesach during the rest of the year, let it be meiser. However, l'may hilchasa, what relevant is this? The l'libayin nisachim. You know what the relevance must be? That there's no libations, there's no nisachim that will be brought together with it. But ask the Gemara, l'mikla alei below yigael. Says the Gemara, but if that were to be true, there would be a problem. Lemilki should be chayiv malchus. Why? Because he's over on lo yigael, a pasuk in Vayikra, which teaches us that meiser cannot be sold. Meiser cannot be redeemed. Responds the Gemara, Amar Kraha Assyria Kodesh ze meiser, whereas ve'in acher meiser. You're right. If it was a real meiser, that would be the halacha. Says the Gemara, this is not real meiser, and therefore such a limitation would not apply. Ask the Gemara further. The halacha would be that it wouldn't need nisachim. Or should be like a bachar that's given to kehanim. Answers the Gemara, no, a Pesach can't be a bachar. You know why? Bachar nami avra. The reason is charnami avra. Avara mi meiser gamer is learned from meiser, and therefore the same limitation by meiser will apply by bachar. Continues the Gemara with the third kasha on this Joshua. Ve'ema shachta l'shem timur lavi timura l'maya chasal l'milki alei l'ingam malchus inami, or l'mekim alei the pasuk of le'imacher v'leigael should apply. Says the Gemara, Amar Marzucha Breder Rav Nachman Amar Kra. Says the pasuk, V'hayahu timurasai. Zu timurasai, that only this is the timura, whereas vein acher timurasai. Another kasha, and again, all these questions are born out of the yesai that we just said a few moments ago, that this Pesach Shechtel Shalishma would assume that status. So says the Gemara, are we going to say that again, that the Pesach Shari Shana should be like a carbon? Taida, and what's the halacha? Lahavi ki taida, that what? L'mayachasa lahatina lechem, it should require bread. Answers Gemara, Miki midi Pesach gufei loy by lechem, u'maiser by lechem. Says the Gemara, how's this shaykh? This is the carbon Pesach. You don't bring bread with it, of course not. And now you're going to tell me that the maiser Pesach that was being switched to would require lechem. Ask the Gemara, wait, based on that yesod, Iachi, Hashtanami, when the Pesach becomes a Shlamim, I'll ask you, Kamid Pesach Gufei by Nisachim, or Meiser by Nisachim. So, anyways, we see that what we're doing with the carbon now is not the same as the original carbon Pesach. Explains the Gemara, Anani Hachi Kamrina. This was the teretz. And not the Meiser Pesach. A Meiser Toida, that if a Toida was exchanged for another Toida, it wouldn't need bread. Vilu Meiser Ta'asilu Me'alma Ba'ilechem, and a Meiser that's now being brought as a Toida being bread, says the Gemara, that is an impossibility. Continues the Gemara, Maskif La, Rav Yemar Braid, Rav Hillel, Mimaydim Meiser Pesach Ksiv. How do we know what the halacha is by the Meiser Pesach? Meiser Asham Ksif. Maybe the halacha that has to only be from Tzayin. Maybe that halacha is not by Meiser Pesach, but rather by a Meiser Asham. Amar Rav, Amar Krav, Imenatzein Karbana Zevach Shlamim. Davar Hashave Bekol Atzayin. And if that's why we're not applying to this case. Maskler Rav Amim Rav Chia, Vidim Rav Amim Barkana Bechol. Atar at Amrit min lohoitzi. Anytime that you have at, anytime you have from, it's coming to exclude. Min l'rabbis, and now the word min is coming to include. Amar Mani achinami min lohoitzi. No, it's excluding. V'lasi ben shtay shanim. V'lasi ben a keva, that it can't be a 2-year-old and it can't be a female animal. Says the Gemara, another kasha, Masler Rav Chana Bagta, Mimas Amrit. Are you going to tell me the Chiksev Hai be Meiser Pesach? This pasuk is talking about a Meiser Pesach. V'amidech sev im kosher. Im eis. The fact that Torah says, excuse me, I said im kosher. Im kesev im eis b'chlal delav Meiser Pesach Ksiv. Why do we buy a lay? The reason being, excuse me, not Meiser Pesach Ksiv. Answers the Gemara, we need that judge is something else. Tanya, Keves, the rabbis, Es HaPesach La'alya. That the Pesach is one of the karbanos that's Alya, that the fatty tail is burned. Ksha'imerim Keves, the rabbis Pesach She'ivra Shanasa, the year passed. Ushlam Abayim Achmas Pesach Mitzvah Shlamim She'yetunu Semicha. Unisachim Utunuva Chazav Shaik, all different Avayis. Kishu'imerim that's going to split up the Indian to do what? That this will not be a case, this will be the exception. That the aliyah, the fatty tail, will not have to be burnt. Continues the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom, the first word line is She'ena. Says the Gemara, we just said that a Karban Pesach above a year is going to be a Shlamim. Ask the Gemara, 1 second. Are you telling me that the Meiser Pesach, this is going to be the Makar? But Ram is Medavu Dishmuel Nafka, Damar Avu Dishmuel. Even at saying Garbana Zevach Shlamim, says the Torah. If the flock is coming from a carbon of Shlamim, Davar Abba Min Atzayin Zevach Shlamim. So something which is coming from a tzayin, from a flock, that is a Shlamim. So says the Gemara, why is Avu Dishmuel learning it from here? Why do we learn it out from how we learned it a few lines ago? Im is, answers the Gemara, Vakati midrav Nachman amar Avu Nafka. Amar Nachman Avu, 7 lines to the bottom. Minay leMeiser Pesach Shekarav Shlamim Shenemar. So why does it say Seinu Bakar Ela Mikan Le Meiser Pesach? He knows it's telling me not to add some Karban Pesach itself. It's telling me that the Meiser Pesach, the residual, the leftover, Shidavar Abba, Minasanim Bakar, remind you what? Carbon! Says the Gemara, it's a Shlamim. So responds the Gemara, we have 3 psukim. What do we do with all 3 psukim? Al Tzlasa, Karai, Ksivi, Lamaisa, you finish the math. Says the Gemara, and you're left with 3 psukim teaching us what you do with this Karban Pesach, this Meiser Pesach, and what's it going to be, and it's going to end up being a Shlamim. So why do we need 3 psukim? Says the Gemara, as you turn over to Tesav Beis Chad, Le'ibra Zmani V'ibra Shana Asai. One is going to be talking about a case where the time has passed and its year has passed. Only the time and not the year. Neither pass luzmanai. So why do you know 3? Why can't learn 1 for the others? I would think it's fully possible. Let's say the year didn't pass. There would still be fit. Because these two, it's pushed away. I would think, therefore, we need all 3 mikayos. From there, we pick it up from the 2 dots, about 10 lines down. Amar Rav Mishmei de Mavoy, that is his name. Chatos sheshachta l'shabchatos nachshain. A chatas that is shechted for the chatas of nachshain is kosher. Damar kra zois toiras achatas toira achas l'chol achatas. Where we learn that there's all one chatas, even a chatas shechted for the chatas of nachshain. You could say, one would think maybe it's more like an oila. Why? Because it's not brought for a simple specific case. Says the Gemara, no, it has a din of a chatas and it will not be possible. Torah achas l'chol chatais. Yosef Rava v'kamer lo lahashmaisa. Eser Risharsha the Rava aser Risharsha. Rav Shimon Aimer kol hamenachas ne'nik v'sush l'shman. If you did the kmitza, the 3 fingers of the menachas shal l'shma mach kshiros, followed by the shem chayla. Lefi she'ein hamenachas dam is zevachim. Shakai meitz machvas l'shem marcheshes. Ma'isam l'shem marcheshes. Then what? V'sim achichem lo l'shem machvas. Chareva l'shem belula. Let's say you messed up that what? You did it dry because you want it to be mixed for something for the sake of a different carbon mincha that was mixed. You see from the action that you did this supposed to be dry. Aval, but here's the contrast. Zevachim eino kain. Shachtal achas lekulam. You shachted once for all of them. Couple achas lekulam, zikachas lekulam. Therefore, there's nothing left over. One is going to be kosher for all of them. So says the Gemara, so what's the kasha? Only because you could see from his actions. But ask Gemara, why is this true? Why don't we say it's one din for all the different menachos? Answers the Gemara, you're right. Why? Because ain't kaparam the mason. Says the Gemara, let's say he was shechted for someone, a regular stam mace. Answers the Gemara, Kamashlan time with the mace. The reason why it's kosher when you shechted for is because, the mace, because nachshan's no longer. Hadachai, domi the nachshan, if you shechted for life versus similar to nachshan. Psula. My new, what would be that case? Chatzas nadir, chatzas mitzayra. Those would be cases that would be ki'ilu he's alive, but he has the din of no longer. Ask the Gemara, honey, oileistenu. I understand, but if it was shechted for a nazir, shechted for a mitzayra, the lacha is as din of an oila. Aliyetmar, hachi yetmar. With this, we'll end the Mashmin the Mavah Chatosh Shachta Al Shem Chuyav Chatos Kenachshan Kshira. Chatos Nachshan is oily. Therefore, it has the status of an oila. Ika diamri, another version of that which we just said. Mashmin the Mavah Chatos Shachta Al Shem Chatos Nachshan Psula. Chatos Nachshan oily. V'leima Chatos Nazir Chatos Mitzayra. Answers the Gemara, no, because Iker Chata is Nakat. But both cases would be applicable. We'll pick it up from Rav's statement about Chatas Chayla the next year. Siyata Dishmaya.